So, how did you finally leave him?
So interesting. We got into another altercation, and I just happened to be far enough away from him this one day when we were fighting that I was able to get out the front door. Our son was there, who was
Mm,
literally like just shy of a 3-year-old. So I felt
okay.
okay, he's 2.5. Like, if I bolt out the front door, Daryl's not going to come after me because he's not going to leave our son in the house by himself. You know what I mean? So that didn't work because when he realized that I had taken off out the front door, he took off out the front door after me and left our son in the house. And it's a November day, broad
Oh, wow.
daylight in suburban, neighborhood in Ohio. And here I go running down the street, and I'm 8 months pregnant. And here comes him, right, running behind me. And I'm just like running for my life. I was literally like, in my head, I'm thinking, I am never going back. I am never going back. I am never going back.
Right,
Whatever I need to do to get Ryland, I will do it, but I'm never going back to a life that I have to live with him.
right. Now, your dad got involved. Didn't he pick you up?
He did. He picked me up at the police station. I called him.
So, when he said the words, everything is going to be all right, I mean, I felt the release for you. I mean, it must have been like I mean, there's your dad just reassuring you. That must have felt wonderful.
It was. It was great. And I was still a little bit of disbelief just because they did not know what I had been enduring. And it was like, I think in his mind, it was like, yeah, everything's going to be all right because now she's left him and everything's going to be fine. But they had no idea what I had lived through for the past 3 years.
He knew that something was wrong. I mean, he went to that retreat
Yeah.
and he was, I think, fearful for you, whether he really knew or not. And he had a peace at that retreat because, he was reassured that you were going to be okay.
Yes, absolutely. And that was really interesting, too, because someone there actually said to him when he was away, just trying to like clear his head, you know, everything's going to be fine with your daughter. And oh, by the way, she's going to come home and she's going to have more than one child. And it was like, how would you even know that? And you don't even know what the situation looks like.
Yeah.
Being able to have somebody just speak into your life and be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing, and I think everything's going to be okay for you. I mean, definitely amazing how behind the scenes, like there was always a plan and it was going to be fulfilled. I just took like this detour.
You said at this time in your life, you felt that you were standing on a cliff thinking about jumping into a pool, and you were looking down and asking yourself, how am I going to do this? But you got the guts to jump and even thought that you didn't know where you would land. So I'm such a visual person, and I was so touched by your strength when you said that.
Thank you. It's a scary place to be, very scary. And I know a lot of other women experience the same exact thing.
Exactly. That's why I loved it so much because I thought of all the women in that shelter, all the women that I've encountered that had to
Yes.
leave such a scary situation and had to jump and had no idea where they were going to land. Some of the most scariest places is the unknown.
Yes, it is because at least it's like where you're at least you know what to expect. But you have to get to a point where you kind of understand like it can't be worse than where I'm at right now. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
in my mind, I was trying to rationalize it and I thought, well, my God, like I don't have a place to live, but I've got friends. Like I'll figure it out
Hmm.
somehow, some way. It might be temporary, but like it can't be worse than this constant abuse that I'm enduring. And now that that's been revealed that my son's enduring. So like I don't have an option anymore. Like the option to stay has been removed off the table. You're gonna have to jump. You got to figure it out now because his life is worth it. And this baby, her life is worth it.
Right. You filed a CPO against him, a civil protection order. Did you feel safe with that order?
Oh, absolutely not. It's interesting, you take all of the steps that you know to take in order to keep yourself safe,
Hmm.
but never, I never felt safe from him. ever. I feel safe now, but
Oh,
not
sure.
not at that time.
Like I said, I'm a visual person, and in your book, you paint this picture of you're pregnant, you need to go back and get your things, and the garage door. Are you kidding me?
I couldn't. It was like this war with the garage door. It was so funny. Once I finally got a hold of that garage door and I was able to push it up, we found like an old headboard that was like in the garage. And I pushed the garage door up. My friend props the garage door open. Daryl's inside the house and he's pushing the button for the garage door to try to make it go down, which obviously like breaks the motor for the garage door because he's just pushing it to make it go down. I've got something blocking it. All I wanted to do was go in the house and get my things. And
Exactly.
I just wanted to get my baby's things and my son's things. That's it. And some of my clothes. That's it. Because when his friends came from the police department, they wouldn't let me take my things with me. So, yeah.
And then when you finally do, you're in, and the police, he's like, well, her things aren't even here. And then he looks in a bag, and I think it was girl stuff for sure. And he's like, are these yours? So, I mean, that
Yes,
was awesome.
it was awesome. Like, yeah, it's your underclothes. Like, hello, do you wear women's underclothes? Like, no, you don't. So, okay, let's just keep it moving, buddy.
Yeah. So you took your things, you do get your things, and you go back to your new place at this time, and you're just like scattered all of your belongings on the floor from trash bags. And you remember thinking, you've made it. And in a way you did, but there was a long way to go. And this next chapter of your life was even scarier as the abuse of the children unfolded. And everywhere you turned, the authorities, nobody would help you.
Not one person, not one person helped me. It is unbelievable. I've actually, and I disclose this in the book, I met with a prosecuting attorney in a local county, and she read my book and she just said, this is tragic because in my case, I literally had everything that was needed to lock people up for the crimes that they had committed and atrocities
Right?
against my children that were just so heinous
Oh my gosh.
because it was like all these different counties and because you're dealing with corrupt people that are in power, literally could not move the needle. So it was just day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, no joke, for three and a
Oh
half.
my gosh, no joke. Right.
Yeah. So I couldn't get anybody to help me. And even when people did, I thought were helping me, like investigators would come and investigate the children, and then the children would disclose that they had been abused and sexually molested and raped and all of these horrible things, and they would tell the authorities what had happened. They would cite it, and then no charges were ever brought.
No.
So it's absurd. It is an atrocity, in my opinion. I think that it is maddening. I can't believe that this is where we were at in the justice system, but nonetheless, that's where we were. And I just want to make sure that our listeners understand. And after the abuse happened with my son and daughter, and they had come back from their last visit with abuse, I did not ever send them back once I knew, like, once she came home and he came home, both of them with visual signs of sexual abuse, they never went back. Prior to that, it was like, oh, so and so did such and such. And I thought, well, if I got a court order that said that Ryland and Sadie couldn't be around certain people, I felt like that was going to keep them safe. I had no idea that my children were being abused by their very own father. No idea.
Right. I had a visual in my head when I was reading all of that, and it was like this, uh, streets just in all directions with all these dead ends at the end of them. And you were just going from police to judges to CSB to, everybody. And every single time it literally was a dead end. And talk about playing God. I mean, it just seemed that each of these players felt that they were almost like a god over your life and they treated you all horribly. And I can't believe that even when a child, and he did, your son ended up saying quite a bit eventually, what he was saying wasn't even taken as truth.
It wasn't. It's wild to me. I can understand being very cautious and wanting to make sure that you don't falsely imprison someone, you know what I mean? Or send
Right.
someone with false allegations to prison over something that they did not do. I understand all of that. But my son what had substantiated investigation with children's services, and so did my
Mhm.
daughter. And they named my ex-husband, their biological father, as their perpetrator. And no one would do anything to help us. And I mean, I don't know what a person's supposed to do.
Oh my
You've
gosh.
gone to literally every single source. You've gone to counselors, you've gone to police, you've gone to judges, you've gone to guardian ad litem, you've gone to, I mean, children's services, literally every single thing. And Daryl was so convincing in that he had all of those people believing that he was the one that was the victim. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
how a narcissist is. They're always the victim. Everybody's done them wrong. And in his own words, everybody did me dirty. And really flip it the other way. He's doing everyone else wrong, but he was so convincing and such a professional con artist that he had all of these people eating out of his hands.
Yeah, you had an investigator on the case that had only been there about 18 months, you say, and some of the things that were done, I was just because I've adopted my kids. They had been abused, and I know the system quite a bit actually. And they interviewed Daryl's family in a group. I mean, I had never even heard of that before. They didn't even talk to you, and they didn't even talk to Rylan. And some of the things, like, okay, the investigator said that he felt that there was no sign of sexual abuse because the abuser denied it. Because the abuser denied it. I'll tell you what, I have never met an abuser that says, yep, I did it.
It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. There is a process that you are supposed to follow as an investigator when there are claims of
Yes.
abuse. And he literally didn't do any of them. He put the entire family and every single person that had been accused of any type of abuse in their living room and asked them point blank, did you abuse these children? These are the nicest people ever. They would never do something like that. They said no, and he closed his case and moved on. Like literally absurd. I mean, did not do his job in any way, shape, or form.
I can't even imagine that. There, like I said, nobody's going to admit it. And your son even named who was doing things to him, still nothing.
Nothing.
But they show up at your mom's house when there was a bruise. Unexpectedly, they just show up, you know? So, I mean, there was such a difference in the way you were handled and the way he was handled all the way through this. They even had a case not open at all because the caseworker forgot to open it. So it went investigated for a really long time. And you kind of touched on this earlier, how counties, because there were things going on in different counties and they weren't talking to each other.
Nope. I think that's probably one of the biggest downfalls in the case because I couldn't get everybody in every county to get on the same page. Like we couldn't put all the pieces of this puzzle together on one table and be like, see here, see here, see here. And to your point earlier about Daryl trying to claim that there was a bruise on Ryland that I had put on him. There was such a mudslinging contest going on, and it just looked like every single time I would say something, he would combat it with
Yeah. Oh,
a false
sure.
against me in
Sure.
order to try to cover up the truth. So it's like you can't win at this battle. And he was never tiring. It was like the Energizer Bunny. I just thought, like, how much longer are we going to have to do this?
You know, your son had a hard time talking to some of the authorities, and so they discredited him. And I was just thinking that what little kid is going to be able to really say those things anyway? And just because he wasn't really able to give his address and things like that, when
Right.
you've been traumatized and
Yep.
you're a little kid, and even when you're an adult, sometimes you're not able to say some of the basic things. But he was screaming in so many different ways with
Yes.
his behavior and everything else. And he did actually say it with his mouth. They should have listened to him, even if he couldn't say some of those basic things.
Agreed. I don't think a child can articulate abuse anyway. I mean, the way that my
No.
children described the sex
Mm-mm.
abuse was just, I mean, you have to understand intercourse, you have to understand sex and what happens during sex in order to be able to even understand what a 3-year-old is telling you about what someone's doing to them. I mean,
Right.
the fact that I mean, they would have had to have seen it, experienced it, watched it. Something had to have happened. And the fact that he was completely discredited the entire time, it's just there's a lot in there of emotion because it's still hard for me to even like think about it because I'm like, we were done so unjustly. Where was the justice? Where is the justice for my children?
Exactly.
Where
Oh
is,
my gosh.
you know?
Yeah. And that wicked witch judge, I
God,
mean, you kept getting her. And I just was like, what is happening? I mean, she treated you so different than
yeah.
she treated Daryl. And she even rolled her eyes at you and laughed, but allowed him to talk and interrupted you and even nodded her head in agreement with him. I mean, I just couldn't believe all the things that were happening with the judge.
It's wild that these people are in power. I mean, what are we to do when this is what we are letting run our society? That's
Yeah, yeah. And
enough.
she was another one that discounted your son. And
100%.
And
Yeah.
I can't believe how she took him back to talk to him. I mean, you say that she didn't even hold his hand. And basically, you were saying that there was nothing warm about this interaction between the two of them. And if you're going to talk to a child about something that's happened to them, my kids were hurt by somebody. And we actually have a center in our county where they take him back. It's a play area. There's a glass where they don't even know that all these police and everything are watching behind this glass.
Wow.
And it's very private. Nobody knows even where this is unless your child has been abused in some way and they have to go talk to authorities. And they have a counselor in there playing with them and doing all these things and getting it out with them in a very natural way. And they don't even really know, what's happening. So I just couldn't believe that that's how they did it.
I couldn't either. I still can't. It still is mind-boggling. And that's why when you said at the beginning, like this really is like made for movie because it is so
Mm.
unbelievable. You can't even make sense.
It it exposes a lot of this.
Mhm. It does. And I think that's one of the reasons why they were fighting me so hard was because they didn't want me to expose their
Mm,
corruption.
sure.
But it's so funny because I just finished, and I'll just tease this out because I think it's appropriate right here, and but I just finished filming for a documentary. And it's on a very, very, very big streaming platform. And it's funny because they wanted to silence me. They wanted to silence me. They wanted my children to just be quiet and to let the abuse continue and just let another generation of people just continue to be silenced and abused. That's all I can say. And so I refuse to let that happen. And it's interesting now because fast forward, I mean, writing a book about my life uh,
Hmm.
was so wild. I never thought in a million years I would be able to do this. But now, writing this book and having this platform that I'm using my pain for purpose to help other people, it's like You thought you were going to silence me. And it's funny because now I have a much larger voice and a much bigger platform than I probably ever would have if you would have just left me alone. You know what I mean? So,
Right,
I mean,
right.
things all work out for a reason, but it's wild when you think about like full circle moment, you know?
I mean, even the hospital, and there were physical exams and there was evidence. And I mean, you had all the things. I just don't know where all this proof was going. It was just like poof. And where was it going that these people weren't? And there was even a part where it was substantiated and it was marked substantiated, but it was still ignored. And there were
Correct.
letters written by, let me see, daycare workers or something, and
Correct.
even that was ignored.
That's correct. Everything was ignored.
But they did pay attention to the child support because that was black and white. I mean, that was the only thing that I could think of as why they paid attention to that.
Well, I mean, that's fast forward like 13 years from the time
Right.
that the case kind of ended. So, yeah, so quick backstory. He was, after the children were disclosing that he was indeed the perpetrator and that one of the perpetrators, and that we did have substantiated reports from Children's Services, he went dark for almost a decade. And then when he
Mm,
resurfaced, we were in court and the judge, same judge, was
yeah.
trying to reestablish parenting time. And now the kids are much older, you know, a whole decade has passed. And we were really just trying to figure out where we were going to go. And because honestly, like we couldn't afford to keep going with the attorney fees. We had a case that went to the Ohio Supreme Court. And
Yes.
one of the reasons why I did the child support thing was my husband, who is an incredible human being, really MVP in this whole entire story, but he convinced me to be my own attorney and said, you know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can't afford to hire another attorney, so maybe you can still keep
Yeah.
pressure on Daryl by using child support, which you're the only person that has access to his financials. So that was kind of the reason why we used that strategy. And indeed, that was what ended up being helping to be one of the linchpins, you know, in this case.
Well, while that was, I mean, we'll get to all of that, but he was living large,
Oh,
large when you were struggling with all of these things.
absolutely. He was living in a nearly $1 million home in a beautiful
Unbelievable.
golf club community and driving a Mercedes S550, like the highest end sedan, you know, that Mercedes even makes. Driving a Dodge Viper. He was traveling all over the world, going to Sierra Leone and, you know, going to Miami and like going to private fights and had VIP passes to meet with like you know, this very you know, important boxer, and you know he was with Floyd Mayweather, you know, just names, VIP people going to like games, like football games, and sitting like front row and getting box seats, and like going to Disneyland and taking his family there, and like just like literally like living his best life. And I'm over here struggling, and my husband's working a second job, and we're pulling every single dime out of savings to try to afford to pay for our attorneys. It was wild. We were in litigation this time almost 7 years.
Your entire life, it seemed,
Oh
was
yeah.
with courts and
Yeah.
handling things with him. It was just so time consuming for you. And another thing, if you weren't going to uphold your end with the visitations and things like that, with what you knew enough that you really believed that he was abusing them, you were going to go to jail.
Oh yeah, I was sentenced to jail and I appealed it like 3 different times. Same judge, she sentenced me to jail because the children refused to go with Daryl and exercise visits with their perpetrator that she ordered them to do.
You know, I thought that there, at least in Ohio, I don't know. I mean, isn't there an age limit when you can say that you don't want to go see your parent?
No, ma'am, 18.
No. 18? Okay. That's not okay. that you
We
don't have a say.
That's right. We need bill reform here. I mean, for sure. My children both had to end up aging out. So you haven't read the book. I'll just kind of give a little quick insight to our reader or to our listeners. But basically, in the book, I explain that the court ordered visits. My son is 3 years older than my daughter. So by the time he hit 18, he went to college. My daughter still had 3 more years to go until she was 18. So she had to continue
Yeah.
up for the visits. She didn't want to leave with Daryl for the visits. And then they sentenced me to jail because the kids refused to leave. I mean, she's 15, 16, 17 years old. I mean,
I
she's
mean, I just can't believe that.
birthday literally in a freaking McDonald's with Daryl's wife, who Daryl didn't even show up on her 16th birthday. He sent his wife again,
Yeah.
for the visit. It's just unbelievable that they have no voice, they have no say, and it's documented that he is their perpetrator. So why they would want to force them to do visits is absurd, and it's just disgusting. I don't know what else to say.
And that's so scary as a parent. I was reading, for one thing, when you wrote like wife number two, I went, what? What? Wife number two. And then you had to deliver, which she left too, but you had to deliver your kids to a person and you didn't even know where they lived. And when you went on this hunt for the house and you went for an envelope that you had gotten from wife number two, I think for Easter or something, and then you ended up like going on this hunt and looking from address to address, and you found $1 million house, 9,000 square feet, and I think it was, or something like that. And but there was nobody. I mean, there was no furniture. And then you got to his parents' house, and there was nothing, I think. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, that would be so scary that you don't even know where your kids are.
No, no. And that's flashing back. So that was when they were little, like
Oh, okay.
3 and 6 years old. That was when he was married to wife number two in the first $1 million house that he was living in with no job. Yeah, and it was wild. So it's like I finally was able to track him down, and it's like you don't even have furniture in this house, and then found his parents'
Right.
house and there was no furniture there. And I'm like, do these people even live here? Like, what is going on? I mean, it just seemed so incredibly bizarre, and no one was listening.
Yeah, your daughter also had signs of abuse as well.
Yes, she did. Unfortunately, she was ordered to do overnight visits with Daryl when she turned 3 years old from this
Just
horrible
unbelievable.
judge. And at that time, I still thought that it was other people in Daryl's family that had been abusing the kids. And so we had one of his family members named in our divorce decree that was not to have any alone time, unsupervised time with our children. And that person ended up, fast forward, he's actually serving time in prison for gross sexual imposition of a minor and rape. This is the same person who also abused my kids. So, anyway, I was thinking that wife number two was going to protect my kids and that nothing was going to happen to them. But to your point, Anne, yes, my daughter did come home, was returned to me from a visit with visual signs of sexual abuse, as was my
Mm.
son. That was their last visit. And I did not know, though, at the time that he had already separated from wife number two. And so the children didn't have any supervision other than him and his family.
It's so scary. When your kids were naming people and they
Yeah,
were saying that they weren't allowed to tell. I mean, everything was there, but nothing. And they accused you of coaching them,
that's
and
right.
someone actually said to you that there's not enough evidence. Send them back to Daryl's and get more proof. I
That's
mean,
exactly. That was an investigator, by the way, with the local sheriff's department. Yeah, that's what she told me. And so I just said it's never going to happen. I mean, that was the turning point for me when I thought, okay, well, if I have to shave my head, move to a new country, create an alias, make up a new life, like whatever I'm going to do, but they will never, ever go back to his lair ever again. They will not. And they didn't. They didn't from that time forward. So I mean, there was a lot in between there, but you're exactly right. No one listened.
Yeah, that to me, when somebody says, go back, let your kids be abused a little more so we can get more proof.
Yeah, no, we're done. You've got enough evidence, you've got enough proof.
And at this time, I mean, your kids are in PTSD. I mean, what did PTSD look like in your son?
Well, I mean, he was 5 years old and attempting suicide. So, I mean, I don't think it gets any worse than that, Ian.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, I mean, I just think that that's absolutely horrible that they've had to have a life of these memories.
I agree. And it's unfortunate because the system totally failed us in every
Yeah.
single way, shape, and form.
There was a something that it really hit me that he felt helpless not being able to help his sister. And I think that sometimes that can be worse. When you see a sibling or somebody close to you being abused and you can't do anything to help them.
I agree with you. That leaves an indelible mark on us as humans because we innately want to take care of each other. We want to help
Yeah.
each other, and he couldn't.
Yeah. He was even told not to cry too, as a really young one by
Yes.
by your husband or your ex. And when he was hitting him, he would tell him, no tears.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's how he works. I mean, you're not allowed to have emotion. You're not allowed to have feelings. He completely desensitizes you.
I love that you got Rylan into so many things, drums, sports. And when he was going through some of those PTSD things, which I thought was really important for our listeners to know, is that you did things like at bath time and at bedtime and things like that to help his mind. I thought that was so great.
Well, I just knew that I didn't like the prognosis. I didn't like the life sentence that I felt like he was given from all of the
Hmm.
medical professionals because of his trauma and abuse.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I just felt like I needed to be his biggest cheerleader. And so I just
Yeah.
started employing every single modality I could to try to help him heal and get on a path to recovery because
Hmm.
we're all here. We're living a life. You might as well live a life well lived in freedom and in the fullness that you're supposed to have, not being miserable and suffering your entire life. And if he wouldn't have gotten those opportunities, he would still be suffering even more than he still does. I mean, we all still suffer, from the aftermath of it, but we're much better than we used to be.
You called child abuse the secret crime. I thought that was really profound. And the actual child protection system muffled your child's cries. I just was so angry at the system.
Yeah, it evokes a type of anger and disdain for the system when you really understand what they did to these children.
One of the things that you did that I loved that helped you to some degree was you actually took notes. And it's so important to people that are going through something similar to have that notebook, that journal of being able to say, this is when we showed up. This is when, he showed up, or this is what happened, or whatever. I mean, it's really important to document all of that and have it in writing.
Absolutely. And I encourage people to continue doing that, doing it on your phone. I know people are fans of that now,
Yeah,
but this type of thing, it can just be deleted from the cloud and then you don't have any record of it. So it's
right, right.
document if you can, even if it's an abbreviated version in some type of a journal or diary.
Now, your friend Meredith said something that I think resonates with a lot of people where they start blaming themselves for not being able to help you. And so, do you have any message to people like your friends around you who were blaming themselves or to other people that were just, if they see somebody being abused and they feel like it's their fault that they weren't getting out?
Yeah, I mean, my only message to friends of people who are being abused is don't give up on them and continue to be a strong support system because they feel so alone and it's
Hmm.
not your fault. It's not your fault. You're
It's not.
not meant to save the world, so don't internalize that, but do try to support your friend or your family member and do try to find resources and constantly sneak them information as you can and sow those seeds and then water, 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 water so that eventually that person can get to a place where they feel like they can, jump.
Now, Daryl, we talked about how he cared about looking all the time to the outside world, but he started getting into trouble. So, what happened?
Yeah, so he had been gone. He had stopped coming to visitations and stopped any type of communication in 2007. So we had slowly put the pieces of our life back together. But I always had people that were kind of keeping an eye on him and what was happening. And he happened to be on the Dayton Daily News in an article where they had investigated him for fraud. He ended up being found guilty in 2000 and I think for 13 or 14. It took several years to get that prosecuted, tried, whatever. And he had 3 felonies at that time for fraud, and he was stealing from people and posing as an investment broker who was going to take their money, invest it in his gold mine in Africa, and give them a 20% return on their investment. And he literally just basically stole their money.
And even then, he ended up pretty much getting off.
Oh, yes. So he should have received, or the maximum sentence that he could have received was 6.5 years in the federal penitentiary for the crimes that he was found guilty of. And he got 0 time in prison and
Oh,
5 years of non-reporting probation.
unbelievable. Now, going back to you for a minute, you say that even the warrior gets weary, and you were tired of fighting. And you said that you could have gotten mad at God and turned your back on him. You said that you could have fallen into substance abuse to numb. You could have become the bitter, vindictive ex, but you instead sought guidance from God and from counselors. And I thought that that said so much about who you were.
Thank you, Anne. That means a lot. I did. We can choose. My mom always said you can choose to get better or to be bitter. And I didn't want to use the energy that I had for any more bitterness or pain because we had already had so much of that. I
Yeah.
just wanted to heal and I wanted to live and I wanted to have a full life and I wanted my kids to have that full life. And so that's why I just chose like the high road and I just felt like he's going to get his. I mean, you reap what you sow eventually. And so, I mean, it might take
Yeah.
longer than others, but
I
eventually.
I always say trust the process, trust the process. And so in patience, it's hard when you have to wait years to be able to see some things come to fruition. But when you say that you went for counsel, I mean, the church actually shunned therapy. So how did you get past that?
Yeah, so this is interesting, and this is just my personal belief, Anne, but I feel like we do people a disservice when we tell them, like Christendom says, like, oh, you just need Jesus or whatever, you just need God, and like everything's fine. And like, albeit, yeah, we do need God and we do need that higher power to connect with. Like, we also need to be able to manage our emotions and learn, like, okay, these are the effects of trauma. This is what it looks like in your life, and this is how you have to deal with it and manage it from a psychoanalysis perspective and be able to have
Hmm.
through it. It doesn't mean that like
Absolutely.
God and like no other modality. I mean, we would all be lost. And so, in my opinion, I believe that like employing all of these other things like therapy and being able to utilize like different modalities to help me be able to process my trauma and my children to be able to process their trauma was going to give us an optimal life, and that was what I was going for. So that's kind of how I worked
Oh,
through.
absolutely. And there's even Christian counselors. I mean, and you came across Miss Julie, and one of the favorite things that she said to you, what that I loved, was that guilt and shame, does not belong to you.
No.
That belongs to the perpetrator that's hurt the kids, not to you. And I was so glad that you got to hear that from someone to remove that shame and get permission actually to feel that way and also to start taking care of you.
Yes, 100%. I love that. I still remember that to this day because, it does rear its ugly head occasionally. Like, how
Mm.
could you do this? How could you marry somebody like this? And I have to constantly remind
Oh,
myself, like, no. I mean, Julie was amazing and incredible counselor. And the fact that when she said that, it literally like helped set me free because I was like,
oh,
oh my.
I bet. Oh, yeah, I could feel that for you. It was so wonderful. I mean, and then you had a second chapter where it didn't go very well. But what I love most is that, your second marriage was the fact that you knew he was not treating you well. You knew he didn't leave you, that you needed to leave right away. But you had become such a strong person by this time
Yeah.
that your daughter immediately went, "Oh, did he lie?" And and you're like, "Yeah." And she said, started carrying his things out, and she had watched you stand up for yourself so much so that, she said, "Oh, yeah, he lied. Well, no, he out." Is so yeah, I
I
was
love
just I know. It was just so cool to watch your strength be passed on to her.
Absolutely. I mean, to know her now, it's like, oh my gosh, she's always been such a strong spirit. But yes, like seeing her even as a little child, 5, 6 years old, like, we're not going to stand for this. Nobody's going to lie to us. Nobody's going to treat us like this. We don't deserve this. It is amazing. And I mean, she didn't end up that way just accidentally. I mean, it was very much of me trying to encourage her to use her voice and to be strong and not to settle for less than what she deserved.
You asked at this time, I mean, you had had some two crappy marriages. I mean, let's
Yep.
and you were starting to get pretty upset with God. Like, these people, other people, they have really wonderful lives. And why? Why God? So, I mean, did you stay in that question very long?
Um, that wasn't a really long season, thankfully. But I really did want an answer because I wanted so desperately to live a happy, fulfilled, victorious life. And
Sure.
I tried so hard.
Yeah.
I couldn't get out of my own way, Anne. And I'm not really a
Oh,
person.
okay.
So I was trying to force things into happening. And I mean, one of the greatest things about me is I make stuff happen. And one of the worst things about me is I make stuff happen. So
That's awesome. That's awesome.
it's like you have to understand like how to bridle that gift. And I was like forcing it instead of just being like, you know what, in this area, the right thing is going to happen for us at the right time. And I am not going to keep trying to force relationships or force people to do things, because I have now taken control. I've taken that agency of my life, which was beautiful and a wonderful thing. But
Hmm.
also realizing, like, okay, I have to learn to trust myself again. That was hard because I've made so many mistakes repeatedly. And I thought, oh my gosh, and
Hmm.
I knew that it wasn't God's fault. Like I'm the one making these decisions. So I can't blame God
Yeah.
that I married another person that, is abusive. So anyway, it didn't last that long and I was finally able to come to terms with it, thank goodness, and get to
Well,
it.
ended up having a head-on collision with grace, you call it.
I did. It was wild. I've always felt unworthy. I've never felt good enough. And I was coming out of my second marriage and I had like this dream slash vision slash like out of body experience. I can't even
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
and it was wild. I mean, you can read the book to get like the full effect, but
Sure.
basically In my vision, in my dream, Jesus came to me and he was walking toward me. And
Mm,
my grace moment was just seeing this vision, this just person so full of love, like the most perfect love you've ever seen. I mean, there was fire in his eyes, and he was just so beaming. He was just radiant love. And I had never known love like that. I didn't even
hmm.
know love like that existed. And when I looked at him, I was like, oh my God. It was just so much perfection. I couldn't even take it. And I fell on my knees and I covered my face like this, like, no. And he kept saying, I love you. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't love me.
Oh,
You can't love me. Don't you know what a mess I am? It was like, don't you know what I've done? I've screwed everything up. I'm a horrible person because I can't seem to get it right. Now I've got two failed marriages. You don't love me. And in my dream, he just took his hands and he cupped my face and he pulled my head up just so sweetly and just compassionately. And he said, I love you. And it
oh,
was
that's
like,
beautiful.
felt it like down in my soul. And it was like, I don't need to walk around in shame anymore. I don't need to have my head down anymore. I didn't fail. I tried really, really hard to love. I tried really hard to be a good wife. I can't help it if other people have addictions and these things that they can't get over. But I am not a horrible human because there have been things that have happened to me that aren't perfect. No one's perfect. And perfect isn't relatable anyway. So that was kind of that turning point in my life with grace that I don't know, Anne, it was just the most wonderful thing that had ever happened up to that point.
Yeah, I really felt that when you painted that picture of that Grace head-on collision. It was absolutely beautiful. And you said in there that it happened to you. And that's really important. I mean, you didn't do this. These things happened to you. So I mean, that was really awesome. Also, things started to get better for you. You you really didn't need a man at that point. You were doing great on your own. You had
Yep.
created this whole world where you had money, you got a car, you got a house, and you were really taking great care of yourself. But there was a place called eharmony.com. So, I mean, tell us. That was such a great story.
It really is fantastic. We love to tell the story. Even our like newer friends now that like have become close with us in the last few years, they're just like, that is just the best story. But I ended up signing up for eHarmony. One of my friends had a beautiful marriage, and she was like, I just think it would be great. You know, you're at a better place in your life. Like if it's meant to be, like the right person will come along, but you don't have to force anything. And I just thought, okay, like it'd be nice to go out to dinner, maybe have something outside of just being a mom, you know, to do. And so I got an email from Dan, who is now my husband,
Mm.
and we ended up talking online, going back and forth via email for quite a long time, several months. So ended up meeting in person, and I mean, the rest is history. It's interesting because I never dated anybody else off of eHarmony, just him.
Oh, okay.
His was the first message that I ever got, and I never ended up talking to anybody else. I just felt like I didn't want to juggle like, you know, three, four different
Hmm.
guys or whatever. And we had great conversation and then ended up meeting. And yeah, it was wild how my world had just absolutely flipped in the opposite direction, but for the better this time.
Yeah. Well, you did finally find someone who treated you well and your kids well. And one of my favorite parts was how Dan helped your son during a meltdown the first time of meeting him.
Yeah, you know, it's really difficult when you think about dating again after you've had all of this trauma-filled past. And then, something we didn't talk about, but, Ryland had a lot of diagnoses. And he was on
Yes.
3 different kinds of medications, including antipsychotics, just to like function because he had
Sure.
so severely been abused. So he had 6 sexual perpetrators by the time he was 6 years old. He was struggling emotionally, had zero coping skills. And even with all of the medications, antipsychotics, different things that he was on, it was still hard to regulate. And I needed someone to understand that this is what I come with. I am a full package. I have 2 children. And
Mhm.
if you are going to be in a relationship with me, this is what you're going to get. And so we got to the point in dating where I felt like Dan needed to meet my son. And that very first night, Ryland had a meltdown at dinner and he ended up going to the men's restroom and he didn't come out for quite some time. And so Dan asked me if I wanted him to go in and check on him. And I said, if you would. And Ryland was in the bathroom having a complete meltdown. He was sitting in there crying on the floor. And the very first thing, Dan's like, well, what's wrong, buddy? Like, can I help you? Like, what's up? And Ryland's like, my food's awful and it tastes horrible and I don't like it and blah, blah, blah. And he's going on and I don't even have a dad. Ugh, poor Dan. Like, God.
Yeah.
I mean, just getting dumped all over and just the very first meeting, bless his heart. But Dan, he's such a champ and he's like, buddy, we'll get you something else to eat. And don't you worry about it. It's totally fine.
He,
And to
that's
Ryland, that was huge.
I love that. And he stood by your side through everything. And I mean, there was a lot more to come that was even really crazier. And he stood by your side. And even through it all, he said that it was the greatest job in the world to take care of you and your kids.
It's wild to think about. Like, I would have left me. I mean, what I'm saying, like, it was a lot. Like, it must be love. Like, nobody would do this if they were not head over heels in love with you. I'm not kidding. They just wouldn't do it. I mean, there's just, it's not worth it. But
Yeah.
he's like my biggest cheerleader. He loves the kids so very much. He ended up taking his case to adopt the children. It ended up going
Mhm.
all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court because my
Mhm.
ex Daryl appealed it. And Dan stayed the course. And I mean, he's just an incredible human, full of patience and love and kindness and all of the things that we needed from a past filled with trauma.
And he had the best proposal ever.
Oh my gosh, it was a flash mob proposal. It was so fantastic. And his daughters were in on it. Mainly his oldest daughter, who was in a dinner theater, and she had all these people come over and surprise me during a flash mob proposal. That was great.
Yeah. So you said that Dan didn't take anything from you. He didn't take anything from you. He added happiness. And when I read that, it just left me in silence because that's beautiful. I love that Rylan said that that Rylan was actually calmer around him. And at this time, he's almost 13, and Dan was going to all of his sporting events, and he loved having this father figure. So I'm glad that he got to experience how a man is supposed to treat his wife and kids, and your daughter also too warmed up to him as a parent.
She really did, and so did Rylan, to your point. It was incredible. I had never had a relationship with a man, and that's why I said that didn't take something from me. Like
Right.
brought something to my life. It's like I had always felt like I had picked takers. And that's obviously based upon my own mental health, right? Because I was just
Hmm.
trying to find somebody to want me. And you'll find people that'll just take you, and then they'll take and take and take and take and take from you
Right, right.
for what it is. It can be money, it can be sex, it can be time, it can be whatever it is. But it was like I always felt like I had to give everything of myself and I got nothing in return. And that's part of that people pleaser place that I was in. And to
Hmm.
have someone that was like, oh, I want to fix you guys dinner. And I'm like, you want to fix us dinner? Like, what? You're gonna, oh yeah, don't worry about a thing. I'll bring everything over and I'll fix dinner for you. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm thinking in the back of my head, because I'm so programmed, like, am I gonna have to have sex with this guy? Am I gonna have to do something for this man? Is he gonna ask me to do something that I don't want to do in a trade for the fact that he just made me a meal. Like that's how like messed up I had been in my past. And it's like, I don't want
Mhm.
anything from you. I just want to take care of you. I just want to be good to you guys. Like, wow. Mind blown.
Well, you so deserved to be treated right after everything that you had been through. But when you were, when things were going really well with you, one of the things that happened was your skin.
Yeah. So I got diagnosed with skin cancer the same year that Daryl came back from the proverbial dead after his nearly decade of a hiatus. And my skin just took the brunt of everything. Largest organ, no less. Um, and I had done 20 years in the tanning bed. So I'd started in high school and, that was kind of my time that it was like my time, Victoria time. I'd get, 20 minutes. I can go lay in the tanning bed really quick, take a quick nap, and that was helped me get through the rest of the day. The heat felt good and it just helped me, kind of feel better. And everybody looks a little bit better with some sunshine. And I always felt like that. And so, when I
Mhm.
ended up getting diagnosed with skin cancer, it was a long journey. Lots and lots of surgeries, lots of biopsies, the topical chemotherapy creams, just all of it.
Yeah, the story behind that story was the makeup and trying to not be pale, look darker. And you felt your beauty was in having that makeup on and not looking pale. Where do you think that that came from?
I think it was just like a deep-seated thing within me as a child, just because I don't I always had this spirit of rejection, like this feeling like I just was never enough. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of a different show for a different day. And I don't want to discuss
Sure.
the true meaning of painting in the rain today, but I will say
Yeah.
like I was always trying to like do something big to make people love me. If I do this, they'll like me more. If I look pretty, they'll like me more. If I wear makeup, then maybe I can mask like some of whatever, like that doesn't feel good enough. Or maybe this will make me look a certain way, which will cause people to treat me different. And then they'll be nice to me. And then I'll have friends. It was just such like a state of insecurity and such a horrible just self image that I had. And so I was trying to always like cover that up and hide behind a mask per se.
Yeah. Just for the record, I waited till the very end of the book to find out why you named the book that. And I don't often read all the way to the very end of a book sometimes with the epilogue and everything, but I read every word to find out why you named it that.
You so much. Thank you. I know. It was like I kept feeling like I need to tell the reader why this book is named this. And then it was so wild because I just never got to the place earlier in the story where I could unpack that. But when you read it, though, doesn't it feel like it fits there?
You know, I told my son, who's 8, a little bit about your story and why we were doing this podcast. And I told him why it was named that. And he went, "Oh, that's so beautiful." And
Oh,
he's 8. I mean,
sweet. Yeah, what a precious child.
yeah. And he said, "Mama, that needs to be a movie." So, from the mouths of babes.
We'll take it. Yes, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah. You had a dream 3 times and you started really feeling like Daryl was going to come back around. These premonitions that you would have, I mean, they were real. And he did start coming around again. You said that it was bone chilling to be around him. And I've been abused and when my abuser, if I even sense that they're around in the same area I could be in, I mean, it affects your skin for sure. You're scared to death.
Yes, and that was part of my issue was just like my parasympathetic nervous system, like my whole entire body was just constantly like cortisol overload. just all of the things. It was too much having to constantly be in front of Daryl because we were in three different court cases with him. So we were in litigation all the time. And so he loved that because he's a sociopath and he liked to be in control.
Which
And
you
so
called a three-ring circus, and
it was
I loved that.
you. It really, I mean, it was like a circus. I mean, he's a clown anyway. But the bottom line was that my body, my physical body, was taking the brunt of all of the mental and emotional abuse. And I do want to just say that this is all coercive control in the court system. And I think there's starting to be a little bit more awareness about coercive control, but this really does have a name. I mean, these people that do these heinous acts, that commit these crimes, and then they constantly are skating through the justice system and never being held accountable. They're very dangerous. And so we need to have some type of reform so that we can help victims. I never wanted to look at myself as a victim. I never wanted to say like,
Sure.
oh, victim. I was always like, no, I'm a survivor and I'm fine. But at the end of the day, like my skin did take the brunt of it, and my body, my physical health was suffering just because of that constant abuse and having to see him and be in his presence because he is so evil, and knowing what he had done to my children and I, and then being forced to look at him was just more than I could bear.
Yeah, I mean, you went for such a long time without seeing him. And then to see him at the your son's track meet, I mean, that must have been paralyzing.
Oh, absolutely. It was. I had a full-blown panic attack. I mean, it was a dark place.
Right. And so then when that starts happening with everything with the adoption and the not being, I mean, that became a whole different mess. I mean, I just can't believe that you just weren't able to break away from him and have Dan adopt your kids.
It seemed so unfair.
Now, there was a number that just kept coming up in your life. What number was that?
17. So
Yeah,
it's wild. I had another dream one night, and you can read the book to get the full story because I know we're like wrapping, but basically the number 17, I woke up out of a dead sleep with this dream, and the number was repeated twice in my dream, and it was the number 17. And when I looked it up, the number 17 meant complete and total victory over your enemy. And I was like wild. Like I could not have made that up. I mean, I really, really couldn't. It was just unbelievable to me that that I would even have a dream that would prophesy or tell of the future that I would have complete victory over this situation. And nothing could have been more accurate because eventually we got there. But yes, I started seeing the number 17 everywhere. And it just was
that's
like,
amazing.
God wink.
I I have that happen to me with numbers, and they do have meaning. And right when the kids were getting ready to go into this visit with Daryl, you had something else happen.
Yeah. So I'm all about signs. I'm that person. It's like I'm not like wooey wooey, but like I am always looking for like, the sign that things are gonna be okay or whatever. We were in like a very metro area, and a bald eagle flew down right above our car right before we went in to do the first supervised visit.
That
Incredible.
was that was absolutely beautiful. I mean, the 17s and the Eagles, I mean, that always says to me, you're going in the right direction. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yes, and that's how I took it.
And I want to revisit what you said earlier about the lawyer thing. You became a lawyer in front of the very judge that had given you such no breaks at all. And also, you got to question Daryl. I mean, how empowering.
I'm telling you, that was literally like the greatest moment because my husband convinced me to be my own attorney. Really didn't have any other choice. We were out of money, out of funds, and we were trying to keep, the pressure on Daryl.
But
And
you were good at it. You were really good in that courtroom.
I played a good attorney one time.
You
But
were good.
I did. We worked really hard. We put together all of our exhibit books. We did recon for several months just to find everything that we could put into the exhibit books. And my main goal was just to question Daryl, get everything that I could out on the record, really. So I just needed him to answer my questions so that I could order the transcripts. And then I had him on cross-examination for an hour and 40 minutes. He sang like a bird because he's a narcissist and he loves to talk about himself.
So awesome.
And that judge, that wicked witch of the bench, she hated the fact that I was, taking as much time as I needed, and she threatened to take away my exhibit book, and, do it herself. She told him to plead the Fifth Amendment and gave him legal advice from the bench.
I know. I couldn't believe that.
It was absurd. But to me, I felt like the skies had parted, the sun had come out, and that the angels were singing the Hallelujah chorus. Because for me, I felt so empowered that day. And I ordered the transcripts and hand delivered them to the feds.
Your strength was just so amazing. I wish that I could have been in that courtroom and saw that because that was so great. And now another part was that your daughter, now this is going on with Daryl, and your daughter fought the fight for years to be adopted with Dan, and her strength just kept growing and growing, and her anger ended up fueling her when she was dealing with Daryl. I'll tell you what, I was like, oh, you go, girl, you go.
She is a powerhouse, let me tell you. I mean, she has absolutely flipped the script on him. And when he was like trying to control the visits, those visits where she was being dropped off and he was going to pick her up and take her, she was just like, no, we're going to have a conversation and you're going to come over here and this is how it's going to go. And I'm going to tell you. And he was like looking at her like, you're the child. You don't get to. And she's like, I'm 17 years old. I am, I do not have to put up with this. If you want to have a relationship with me, you come over here. And I mean, I was just so proud of that resilience and, her persistence to use her voice and to speak up for herself and stand up for herself. You have to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And she did not, I mean, bullies back down when you reverse it.
And
And
he is a bully. Yeah.
he met his match. I thought that was great. And I wanted to high five her when she disclosed her abuse to her teacher, and she
Oh,
wrote
yeah.
a school paper, and how powerful that was on victims can be victors. Let us utilize these traumatic circumstances to help others gain courage and boldness to discuss their issues, which ultimately will help them live better lives, she said. And I just thought that that was beautiful. Good for her. She was silenced so much, but she was able to have a voice.
She was, and it's really interesting. Like it only came at the tail end of that entire, case that she was able
Sure.
to utilize her voice. But it's interesting because she earned an appointment to the United States Coast Guard Academy, and she's currently
Mm,
serving there and getting her
mm.
bachelor's degree. So I'm like super, super proud of her,
Oh, awesome.
incredible, but she's also been able to share her story with others to help empower them, which is what you were just talking about, the paper that she wrote in high school. Now she serves as the vice president of CASA, Coalition Cadets Against Sexual Assault at the Coast Guard Academy.
Oh, that's so great.
He spoke at at one of the meetings at the Coast Guard Academy earlier this year in the spring. They have like this once a year. It's actually Eclipse is what it's called, and she spoke at Eclipse at the Coast Guard Academy. She shared her story in front of the entire Corps of Cadets, top brass. There's like 1,400 people in the place, standing ovation when she gets done speaking. So she's continuing to use her voice for good and continuing to help other survivors of sexual assault and abuse find their way.
And so's Rylan. He's speaking as well, which is
Yes,
amazing. I mean, I would love to have him on someday, possibly. I don't know. But
yes,
I mean, that's so great that their strength turned into being, where they are out there speaking their truth. What
yes,
ha
I agree. I echo that sentiment 100%.
Protecting your kids becomes a full-time job, and it did with you for sure. You should not have had to do all of that. While you were protecting your family, you also had to take on Daryl, and you started from one department to the other because you knew that something was wrong and you knew that he was living these different lives when you started realizing, hey, why is he off the radar? So how did he stay off the grid?
Well, he started using aliases.
That was crazy.
Wild.
Unbelievable.
I can't believe that he actually was so successful with it. I mean, I would not have had the nerve to pretend like I was a prince of any nation. And,
Did
he
did he
did.
take on the accents and everything of a Ghana prince? I was,
He would turn it on and off when it was like
oh,
necessary. It was kind of funny. He would say it like on the stand when he said his name. He said Actibo with like his Ghanaian accent.
oh.
It's not Adipo, like, because I would just say Adipo, and he had to put that, that little accent in there for us. I'm like, you are not from Africa, first of all. You're from Dayton, Ohio. We all know where you're from, like on the west side. Like you are definitely you've got an accent, but it's not a Ghanaian accent by any means.
Well, you finally got the FBI to listen. And it took a year and a half, I think it was, where you finally got this phone call that let you know that they're investigating him.
Yeah, it was actually the Secret Service to be.
Okay. Oh, the Secret Service. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's wild because Department of Homeland Security got involved because Daryl was also a pastor. And so
Mm.
he had started a cult. And so there were a lot of people that moved with him across country. And some of the people had family members that were concerned about them. And so they contacted DHS. And then DHS, they work really closely with the Secret Service. So it all ended up coming together. And I got a phone call from the Secret Service. And I'm like, we just got called up to the big leagues.
Yeah, you did. Oh, yes, you did. And I mean, PHOP, when I see it, I see the word poop. So I don't know. I mean, he, he started this cult that made me think of poop. And I guess for a reason. And he did. He took everybody, he got them to believe in him and move them across Colorado, which, by the way, your God was very much protecting your daughter that day when for the readers will have to read it. People will have to read it, but yeah, she almost got kidnapped. So
She did. And that was one of our biggest fears. So, we had a lot of fears, but that was definitely one of them. And thank God she was safe and stayed protected. So, yeah.
so he goes through the whole court system and he's convicted. I mean, there were 16 counts against him. Is that correct?
That's correct. And he was found guilty of 13 of those.
Well, God is bigger than every single thing that he tried to do. And so fortunately, God won, and so did you guys. But at the very end, I think it was the marshals, U.S. Marshals, maybe, they took his handcuffs off of him. And what happened?
So it was really wild. I mean, when you read the book, it's a really, really crazy long trial, 2 weeks long federal trial, right, right after the height of COVID. And I was watching after they had read his sentencing or his the verdict, and the federal marshal took his handcuffs off, and then the other federal marshal put another set of handcuffs back on, and he was already in shackles. And I'm like, this just seems so bizarre, but I was just like, whatever, like I don't know. So they took him out, and then we were leaving from the gallery in the courtroom, and the U.S. District Attorneys and the Secret Service were there, and we were kind of just like debriefing, like, how do you feel? Like, what's going on, whatever. And then the Secret Service just said, we really appreciate everything you've done to help us prosecute this case and to make sure that we brought justice not only for the victims but also for you and for your kids. And I just have a small token for you. And the Secret Service agent reached in his pocket and handed me those handcuffs that were on Daryl. And I was just like, oh my God, like greatest, moment ever.
I bet. Do you still have them?
Oh, I do. They're actually Like you can't see it in the frame, but they're laying right here within an eye shot of me in my curio cabinet.
Oh, that's awesome. And then you wrote, to get where I am, I had to break free from the shackles of fear, guilt, and anxiety. Now I live in absolute freedom. So, what a representation that those handcuffs were.
Absolutely. Um, you know, we can be in control of our lives.
Right.
We have agency in our lives, and we can take the control back from people that have tried to rob us and steal that from us. And so I didn't want to live a life of fear and anxiety and trepidation and constantly just, wandering like, I just knew that there was more for me and that was much more for my children. And so I had to fight for a really long time to get to this place. But I can truly say, like, I made it, I mean,
You
I
did.
perfect life. I still have issues. We all have issues. I still fight all of the things like everybody else in the world fights, but ultimately, I feel like I've won. I've won the game of life. I feel like I have amazing kids, a fantastic husband, a family that loves me. I love people. I get to meet people like you. I overcame my fear of, not wanting to be sharing all of the mistakes I had made, but using it for the greater good, and it's working out swimmingly. And I just feel really fulfilled, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, your story, it's so difficult, but yet it's so empowering. And I can't find the quote, but one of the quotes that you said that I loved had, and you, if you can, fill in my blanks, something about I mean, life is hard, but you're going to get to the end of the day 100% of the time. It goes something like that. Do you
Yeah.
remember?
I think basically just saying like the time's gonna pass anyway. So, try, I don't know if this is the one that you were talking about, but just trying to utilize your pain for your purpose. And at the end of the day, like you're gonna show up at, you're gonna have to live your life. So you might as well have a life well lived. You want to leave a legacy and you want to be able to inspire other people. I mean, that's why we're here. So
Yeah, yeah. I think our purpose is to take our pain and to use it for good. And yeah, I mean, and that's what you're doing. And your book is absolutely going to help many people,
thank
many
you.
people.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
I hope so. Thank you. And thank you for reaching people and helping bring hope to, a really dark, dark world where a lot of people are suffering, and we can help make it better.
Yeah, if you are a victim of domestic violence or child abuse, please contact your local shelters or call Children's Services and report it. And I will pray that you have a much better experience with all of those entities that uh, Victoria did not have, because everybody deserves. And I pray that maybe that there's some changes that happen through all of this.
100%. If not, I mean, I haven't given up trying to put a bill up that would help us get some type of
There you
right.
go. There you go. All right. Well, I really hope that everybody reads this book. Let people know about this book so you can take all these little nuggets that are in there and then pass them on to other people, because I guarantee that everybody will be touched by this book in some way, or you might know somebody that's been abused or has, being abused and that needs some help. So,
Yeah, so the title's Painting in the Rain, a true story of trickery and triumph.
and how can they get a hold of you on your website, or what is your website?
It's victoriaellen.co, and it's Ellen, Ellen, and that's also my handle for all of my social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, all of the above. So victoriaellen.co, as well as on YouTube.
And you have to wait to the very end of the book to find out why it's called Painting in the Rain.
Thank you, Anne. It's worth
Uh,
the wait, though.
it is worth the wait. I mean, I thought I wasn't going to get the answer. I really thought I wasn't. I thought I was going to have to ask you on here, why did you know, and then there it was. I was like, oh my gosh. And it brought a smile to my face. It was a very mixed emotion when I read it.
Thank you. Thank you. It just fit. It was perfect. And we all are doing big things now and we're helping each other. And I just appreciate you so much, Anne. Thank you for all the work that you do to help people get out of these situations.
And thank you so much for being on. And for all of our listeners, we will see you next time.